Good afternoon, everybody. So, Cllr Mili Patel, and I chair the Values and Principles Board at the Cooperative Council's Innovation Network, and I'm also the Deputy Leader at Brent Council. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It is a really exciting time when we launch our applications for our sort of policy lab work. The CCIN is a rapidly expanding cross-party local government network in terms of sort of working collaboratively across sorts of political lines in order to promote an innovation and cooperative approaches to sort of council policy and practice. So as you can see there, the number of sort of members that we have in associate members and also affiliate members. But it's all about encouraging councils to work with local people, organisations and partners to sort of reshape those public services and also have community leadership around cooperative values and ensuring that democratic engagement is part of that co-production, as well as social partnership and innovation. You'll see here in terms of sort of being a cooperative council, so there are core features of a cooperative council. I'll run through some of those, but you'll see where you've got community wealth building and cooperative placemaking, but it's all part of working with residents and not just for them. So services are co-designed and also sometimes co-delivered by our communities, which is what we want to see. And then democratic participation is very important. So there's a great emphasis on involving not just residents, but the staff, businesses and community groups in part of that decision making. And then community wealth building, as you can see there on the slide on the left, is like using procurement, employment and investment to keep in making sure that wealth is local and it supports social value. And then there's social partnership, which is stronger collaboration with trade unions, voluntary organisations, housing associations, cooperatives and anchor institutions as well. And then we also ensure that in terms of sort of what we deliver, that fairness and inclusion always runs through. So reducing inequality and ensuring that services reflect the needs of the diverse communities that it sets out to. And then also a part of innovation through collaboration. So that's all about testing new approaches. And that is very much the core of CCIN's work, is to reshape those public services, but testing those through as well. Here you'll see that the statement and the values and principles, so this is really our logo, but it also forms our core values and what we'd want to see when we develop a working programme, especially in collaborations with the Cooperative Council's Innovation Network. So we have over 600 case studies and we're continuing to grow those packs. And the case studies packs are really practical and solution focused. So it will include a summary of challenge that was faced and then the cooperative approach that was taken, what partners were involved and what was delivered, and also about the outcomes and also ensuring that there's a measurable impact on those outlines, on those impacts. And then also sort of like, what are the lessons that are learned from what we, have done? So those case studies should ensure that, lessons learned, and then there's also about the transferable part of it as well. So, it should be evidence-based, giving us real examples from member councils about how they do it. So each idea is to aim to inspire yourselves as members to replicate those, and it provides you with all the tools. It also demonstrates how cooperative principles translate into those kind of tangible policy and service improvements. And overall, it should read as a toolkit for a real world innovation grounded, in actual proper values and community partnership, rather than theory and just sort of sitting there on the shelf. It should be there for you to take. And as members, you'll have access to all those types of case studies as well. And the types of case studies that we have, they, typically sort of fall under several broad themes. So it's community co-production, community wealth building and social value. There's also part of democratic innovation and participation. Also, you'll see that there's asset transfer and community ownership. There's inclusive growth and regeneration, organisational change and workforce engagement. And then obviously we've got the main part as well, which Morgan will go through with you, is the actual sort of programme of policy labs.
Thanks very much, Millie. My name's Morgan Jones. I'm a strategy manager at Cheshire West and Cheshire Council, and I'm our link officer between the council and the CCIN. Thanks everyone for your time this afternoon. Thanks, Millie, for that introduction. Basically, we're here to talk about the launch of the application process for the CCIN Policy Labs for the next year. It's worth mentioning that the CCIN funds basically two kinds of policy work. One is the Policy Labs, and basically this is the more significant piece of work we're focusing on today. These are projects that can last up to 2 years and can receive funding of up to about £20,000. So Policy Labs are our main focus in terms of some significant work, significant funding. I'll just talk about Policy Labs a bit more in a moment. There's also policy prototypes, which are smaller projects, which are funded by up to £2,000 and are delivered within 12 months. So basically there's two options if you're looking to have some work funded, the kind of focus you might want to have, and it depends on how long it might take, the number of people you might want to involve, because the key difference, as well as timing and funding between the Policy Lab, policy prototypes, is prototypes tend to be based within one member organisation. Policy Labs need to be a coalition of a few members. On the screen now basically is just a screenshot of a number of covers of different policy labs, just to show the range of work that the network has funded over time and that our members have delivered against. So things around tackling barriers to building cooperative economy, arts and cultural social cohesion. One I was involved in, led by Rochdale. This is not a manual on co-production, which was a really interesting, quite a different feel to that policy lab from others I've been on. Looked at some really interesting engagement approaches, ways of sharing decision-making, sharing power, having a real range of voices, developing that manual. It's also the only piece of work I've been involved in that I was actually interested in particularly, and asked for a copy of the report she could use in her own work. Another one on the screen that I was involved in, actually led, was around understanding the digital divide, which again was a really positive piece of work, brought together around 6 or 7 authorities, all of us looking at actually digital exclusion within our boroughs, what could we do about it, and sharing the different tools we were developing to create a toolkit for anyone to download and use to have a policy for digital lending labs, have an online way of looking at data on digital exclusion at a regional, at a local level as well. So basically, a little while ago, as part of the ongoing work of the network, we reviewed our approach to policy labs. And part of this was, at the last conference, we had a seminar on this. We did a survey of people just to understand how people feel about the policy labs. And people did find them really valuable. It's worth mentioning that every lab is a little bit different. They are led by different councils. They're led by different individuals within those councils. They focus on a different topic. They can vary significantly from lab to lab, which I think is a real strength. And it is that tailored approach of the people you're working with. But what came across very clearly was that people benefited far more from being part of a lab than just downloading the product. As useful as the products are, people benefited far more from being involved in a lab and developing that work rather than just reading the report at the end of it. So I really would suggest to people, even if you don't want to lead on a lab, being involved in a lab is a really good way of basically getting to know more people in the network, becoming a more active member of the network, and getting more out of that policy lab and whatever area of work you're exploring as part of that policy lab. I've also found actually having our council's name on policy lab reports has been really positive as a way of publicising the network internally, linking people in with that and showing the worth of that work to my colleagues, and certainly my lead member has really appreciated being able to do that as well. I would say that policy labs, it does take capacity. So therefore it is something that where I've found them most useful, it has been a problem. Policy labs who tackle a problem that I need to tackle anyway are the ones that are useful. I mentioned digital exclusion being one I'm involved in. I mentioned co-production. Both of those were things which were part of my day job at the time. So actually being able to tackle those with colleagues from other authorities, borrow, steal their ideas for what we're doing internally really helps, because this is a cooperative, you get out what you put into it. That said, there are alternative ways of looking at how we support people. We've had one officer leaving the council but working freelance to continue leading Policy Lab when they left. But fundamentally, I'd say Policy Labs, people get involved with them, find them really effective. They're a really positive thing to do, and there's a lot of learning there. And it is worth looking at the Policy Lab reports that are on the CCIN website. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of learning there for you already. But there is a challenge to Policy Labs. I think, this is about launching the current process, but the clinic to talk to people about experiences and things you might need to know before you go into Policy Lab. It does take capacity, whether you're leading them, whether you're contributing. So you do need to be aware of that. We've had issues where basically as staff turnover happens, you can lose a champion with an authority for a Policy Lab. So if, where I've been working with colleagues and that colleague has moved on, it is worth bearing that in mind. So actually getting involved with a number of councils, a number of affiliates is a really positive way of kind of spreading that risk almost. Also in terms of challenges, we put in detailed timelines of what we're going to do. We seem to have a lot of by-elections locally for various reasons, but there are various events and things which cut across timelines. It's worth being aware of that and building that in to any plans you do for delivering as a Policy Lab. And being aware that many of us go into things with very ambitious mindsets, need to be realistic about what can be achieved as well. So actually, the enthusiasm you go into something with as a new project, be aware that it takes time to work in partnership. And like I say, this needs to be a problem that you're dealing with in the day job, but the day job can get in the way as well. So be sure that you're being practical when you set out a plan for delivering a Policy Lab, that it is achievable. And I do think the strength of Policy Labs are getting a range of people involved. Even where I've been part of a lab where we didn't have people signed up to be involved, because I know various people, I could reach out to them, get case studies, get them to get involved a little bit as well, because I think that multiplicity of voices is really important. The final challenge I'd mention in terms of Policy Labs is tracking or evidencing change. And this is something I'd encourage people to think about more at the start of Policy Labs. So kind of, what is the legacy going to be? If we're developing a toolkit, how can we look at how well used it is? How can we keep things updated, keep them live, and keep them moving forward? So basically, very quickly, some hints and tips ahead of talking about the launch of this year's application process. I think being an active part of the network is really important, whether you're on a member group, officer group, affiliate, actually getting to know people, joining the meetings, having the conversations, really helps have those relationships in place when you start to look at doing work together. But then that work can deepen those relationships as well. Having those relationships means you can start earlier than this program suggests. We're launching the application process now, but there's no reason why you can't have conversations early in the application process to see what people are interested in, because a lot of this is about understanding, well, actually, these things I need to tackle in the next year, 18 months. Who else needs to be looking at the same things in the same time frame? Can we meet? Can we work together? Is this something we can think about, cooperative principles, about what's the cooperative difference in this area? Can we develop this up, get a bit of funding from the CCIN to do something that is useful to others? But get involved with other people, have conversations, start an idea, see where it goes and evolves in conversation. That broad involvement is really important, both with other councils, with affiliates, and with associates as well. Everyone brings an awful lot to the table. And as I say, the more people are involved, the more you're protected against capacity issues, changes in personnel, meaning some people need to drop out, but also it is having that range of ideas, that range of people to help take work forwards. As I've said already, if you're doing a Policy Lab, it needs to be useful for your day job. It needs to be a problem, because if it's not something that you need to deal with anyway, it's probably not something other people need to deal with. Really, Policy Labs are about us working together as a cooperative set of councils to tackle a problem together. As I mentioned, it's worth thinking about communications and legacy from the start. Policy Labs, it is significant funding the network puts into these things. They need to have an impact. So actually thinking through, as you're developing things, how can we communicate this? How can we get this out there? How can we set all this work out in a way which enables people to pick it up, to run with it, and to make sure this actually is useful for a number of councils, a number of affiliates, a number of associates. And the final thing I say is, as I say, up to £20,000 for a Policy Lab, £2,000 for Policy Prototype. you'll need to put in a budget for what that money is for, how you're going to spend that, how that will help deliver the policy lab, policy prototype. Think about that from the start in those early conversations with people. What will that money enable you to do over and above what you could have done just as one council working alone? So as I say, that's basically a quick overview of why policy labs are good. Some of the challenges in doing them is just paint a realistic picture, and some of the tips that we've gathered from conversations with a number of us. We are launching the application process for the current year for policy labs. Basically, the deadline for submission of all bids is midnight on the 16th of March. So we've got a little over a month to have those conversations. And then basically the week being the 23rd of March, the EOC and the VMP board will consider all the bids. So you will need, if you're putting a bid in, you'll need to be present at that meeting and talk about and answer questions about your bid. You'll have time, a bit of time to respond to those questions after that as well, before final sign off of bids on the 13th of April, and then basically starting work in mid-June. There is some guidance around policy labs and prototypes on the website. I won't go through the details because it is all up there, but basically this is about producing work that is of a publishable standard. So we need to hit that standard with the products we're producing. We need to think about videos, exec summaries. We need to bring out that cooperative difference. So highlighting the values, the principles, learning points within any products of policy labs. As part of that comms approach, we just need to think about a short text of project, making sure we use the newsletter to advertise things. Next year's conference or 2 years times conference, I want to see a webinar for the project that you've been involved in at the moment, the policy lab that you've taken forward, so we can kind of share that understanding and have that unpacking of the outcome of the project, sharing all that as we go forward. So basically, the policy lab process is now open. There is an application form online, and I'll put that into the chat, or perhaps Pete can after this, so people can just click on, and there's a spreadsheet online that you can basically just put in your ideas or see what ideas other people are putting up and pop your email address in against it to start that conversation. So if there are ideas that you have for policy lab you to take forward, we can pick that up in the chat in a moment, but there is a facility on the CCIN website where you can start to talk about those and get in touch with other people who are interested and see what other people are suggesting goes forward. That's a blank spreadsheet at the moment because we've only just launched this, but I'd like to see some good ideas there. So fundamentally, that's a quick overview of the policy lab and prototype process, the application process, and really it's now over to you. So this is basically our time to, there's a number of people on the call I can see, thankfully, who've been involved in previous policy labs prototypes. So this is a space now where either we can kind of flag ideas of things we might want to look into in the future, but also if you have any questions, if you have any concerns or things you want to raise about policy labs, really happy to be part of the conversation about ways of taking that forward.
Yeah, it's Eleanor Murray from Camden Council. We're fairly new to the CCIN. Sorry, excuse my voice, I'm a bit poorly today. We're relatively new, and basically the leader of the council is very keen on pushing forward an agenda around cooperatives, and so I'm at the early days of working out what our strategy should be. A lot of it's shaped around the recommendations from the CCIN. But I'm part of a strategy team. I'm not part of the service that would be delivering a lot of these things. And in fact, it sits between services a little bit. So if we did a policy lab or a policy prototype, it wouldn't be me actually leading on it. So has anybody got any advice about how I can sort of get people excited about the opportunity? Because to me, it's like, great. There's money, there's peer support, you know, what a great thing to do. And actually at Camden, we like taking risks, we do test and learn and things like that. It's part of the culture. But because no service owns this piece of work, loosely inclusive economy, maybe community partnerships, it isn't hitting just yet. So I'm just wondering if anyone's got any hints and tips for kind of getting people interested in kind of bringing some ideas and coming with an idea, because to be honest, what we'll probably end up doing will be joining another prototype, but I would like to see if, take the opportunity if we can.
I'd suggest the starting point for me would be, if you look on, there's the funded projects already on the website. There are a few toolkits around, cooperative councils, around cooperative development toolkit that are well worth looking at as a springboard. And I think that's quite a good way of getting people excited in terms of seeing what can be produced. I think talking about one that I was involved in, basically the discipline exclusion toolkit, I found that really useful because the way that's set out is basically it talks about the need to have certain policies, and the appendix there are 3 policies from different councils that you can basically just download and copy and amend to suit your own point of view. So, but I think that's quite a practical one to look at and see how people came together to do some work. Different councils were able to contribute different things to that, and it meant that we all could consider what others had done whilst taking forward our own work. But I think a lot of it is get some people along to the officer network. It can be a really interesting conversation, so understand what other people are doing in this space. But really, it needs to be the idea that sells it, I think.
You raise a really good point then, Morgan, and I think it's really important that as we've got the officer network of the CCIN, it sticks close, and a lot of the time that's probably our policy manager link and bits and pieces. But when you get into that world of policy projects, policy prototypes, there is an opportunity for different parts of the council to be engaged. So it might be running on in a different area rather than kind of attending the officer meeting every month. So absolutely, some of these projects are very niche. We did one last year that we just delivered around tackling violence against women and girls. So there are all sorts of themes. Jonathan, I see you're on the call. I don't know if you're able to talk, Jonathan Downs from Oldham, about how you've managed to harness different parts of your council to engage in policy labs.
In terms of the policy lab process, I think it very much is about building awareness of the network and the value it can add to your organisation. And I think that can be something, especially as policy leads, you tend to get really into the network yourself, and you tend to forget to invite your colleagues onto the calls. And has already been mentioned by Morgan and Pete, I think the more people that you can get excited about the work of the network in your local authority, the more your organisation is able to get out of its membership, and the more value you're adding to, of course, your residents too, in terms of that wider participation and that wider knowledge sharing. What we tend to do in Oldham is, if we see relevant events that, for example, if there's a housing policy lab, we will reach out directly to our housing colleagues, sort of usually do that, kind of explain a little bit about the network, because most people aren't aware of what the CCIN does, and kind of tell them that it's not just another thing that they're going to have to go and sit on a call about, but it's a real opportunity to actually go learn and share best practice. And we find that most officers are very receptive to that message. The other thing we do, of course, is often send over the case studies that have come out previously from other local areas. So when we see interesting stuff from a policy perspective that we think other officers might be interested in, we're always sending stuff around the organisation. I think that has really started to build up that kind of knowledge of the network and the appreciation for what happens across all the different facets of it. So yeah, my recommendation is just to involve as many people as you can.
I can see we've got a question in the chat, but I also see Fiona got your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Thanks, Morgan. I was just going to say to Alina, getting buy-in from other officers, if anyone figures that out, that'll be the $1 million question, let me know. But certainly events like this, actually, although this is an online conference this year, and of course there are benefits to having it in person as well, the big benefit of this whole event this year is the fact that I've been able to get other officers to come along for like one workshop. I'd never get them to travel somewhere for a whole 2 days, But I said, look, this workshop, just come along, hour and a half, just have a little listen. By the way, this is CCIN, this is what we do, because I know all about it in the sorry, I'm Fiona Gibson, Cardiff Council. Sorry. But yeah, I know all about it. But yeah, so events like this actually really help the buy-in, and everything else that Jonathan and Morgan have said about just sharing case studies, sending it as emails, keeping awareness as high as you possibly can. But yeah, if you crack it, honestly, please let me know.
I think I just wanted to say to the question, it's a really good question. I think that it has to work when you almost sort of like the members have to align with officers, and it's worthwhile having a look in terms of sort of members where their portfolios especially have maybe community power or community wealth building as part of their portfolio, because I think that that's where it would sit quite neatly. And then it's about sort of like, okay, well, what are the kind of like policy that you're looking at that you'd like to see, because like you say, it's quite a sufficient amount of money. And then working with neighbouring members, so for example, where I am in Brent, I will work with well, I should work with Camden, but we work with Westminster, we would work with Harrow and Ealing. So you know, it's those sorts of things. You can work with somebody direct neighbour, but also what we find is really exciting is that if you work with actually somewhere really quite, you know, further away, so like, you know, Swindon is always a really good partner to work with, or there's Rochdale as well. So I think that it's about what Morgan said earlier, you know, I think minimum 3 partners, partly because it's to do with capacity, but also the kind of like knowledge and expertise that you can bring into your sort of your policy lab is really essential, and then continuing that sort of active membership as well. But there has to be a corporate buy-in as well, and remember that you're a member of this organisation, so you know, use it to your maximum.
Thanks, Millie. Paul, I think there's a question coming in, and I'm going to come to you and Millie for this one, because as board members of EOC and VMP, you are ultimately the ones who decide. But the question is around what distinguishes successful bids from unsuccessful ones, and are there common pitfalls and weaknesses? And
well, I think it's firstly that it meets the criteria. I know it sounds really basic, but you know, ensuring that your application does actually speak to it, rather than sort of like, you've got an idea, how do I fit it in to, you know, what a policy lab is. I think that you need to sort of like have a bit of both, really. So you've got an idea, but does it meet those CCIN principles? So, you know, when you saw the I think it was the 3rd or 4th slide where I talked about sort of like our logo, it's really important that does it meet those criteria. So as when my board meets, you know, it will look at things like, you know, is there social partnership? Does it have enterprise in there? Is it innovative? Does there co-production? You know, what are the learning tools about it? And are communities leading in this as well? So, you know, those models have to be sort of, those values and principles really need to be core of your bid. And I think that that's usually what makes a successful bid. And sometimes we find something that's a really great idea, but it just looks like, well, where does it sit? And it sometimes not doesn't quite neatly fit in with the values and principles. And sometimes we have to then sort of, you know, turn it down and reject the it. Or what we will always do as a board is that come and speak to us, come and speak to Morgan. You know, we want to help you in order to sort of like, you know, get it over the line as well. So there might be some things that we do go back to as a board. So we do look at each individual application.
thanks, Millie. If you're on our AGM, you're here tomorrow, what was approved. But for 2024/25, there was 10 projects that were approved, and that had a combined budget of over £109,000. So, you know, in that year, we had the council's co-op development toolkit that Cllr took us through earlier on in the week in the session. There was one around cooperative values-driven AI, which was led by Wigan. Tackling barriers to developing a cooperative economy, led by Oldham. The social value toolkit for cooperative councils, I think it was initiated by Oxford City Council, and then things changed, and I think the CCIN took it on. And then we got the cooperative approaches to sustainable food that Oldham did as well. And from a prototype point of view, we had the Cooperative Community Bank of Kindness over in Stevenage, turning strategic plans into art at Inverclyde, cooperative culture making in Rochdale, obviously in Rochdale, employment and skills outcome-based review for Brent, and engaging and empowering the residents of Woolwich Common Estate. So they're the types of themes that have been coming forward from previous years. And currently in this year, the bids for 4 projects were approaches to post-16 transition led by Manchester. And if you might have been involved yesterday in the care experience, treating care experience as a protected characteristic, Swindon ran a session yesterday as part of the conference on that. And then there's one around faith, young people and resilience, led by Greater Manchester Combined Authority. And Stevenage and Brent are running the last one for this year, which is sustaining local leadership and place-based innovation. So you can see that in terms of the government priorities, you know, there's a real mix of projects coming in across the board.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add to what Pete said, I think it's really helpful if you also could look at sort of the government missions as well. So, you know, we did one around cooperative house building, because we know that the government have got a big house building program, but you can also, you know, about economic growth, so, you know, the local economy, and there were some examples that Morgan mentioned as well from previously done. There's also around climate action, there's also obviously the NHS, but, you know, as a local authority we can look at social care, and there's lots of sort of ideas that kind of like been around this. And there's also, we had one earlier this morning that you can probably watch back on. It's around pride and place, and there are so many ideas that come around pride and place as well, and especially given that local authorities are just receiving funding for those. You may think that, you know, there's a project that you're working on, but it's something that could be bigger, and you could work to collaborate with some other authorities on that.
Very early days, but I've got a workshop tomorrow looking at community hubs, where we've got various colleagues from Health, the ICB, the Cheshire West Partnership, talking about what they're doing on hubs. I've got about 5 different council services who all have hubs of some kind, community hubs. Got the voluntary sector coming to talk about a number of hubs they're developing. Some of these hubs cross those, or 2 of those 3 sectors. It seems to be something where everyone locally is looking to set up some kind of hub somewhere for various things. And that's something that could be of interest. So one of the conversations I've literally had in the past few days, so this is very early to raise as a policy lab, but with the idea of, there's an issue with people saying, I'll come and sit in your building, but I don't have any responsibilities. And someone's talking about potentially setting up a CIC to run a building and have actually health put in a certain amount of money. So a certain amount of responsibility, but also the opportunity of using that hub, the council, community sector as well. So some kind of model where actually the hub is owned by the full range of people. So it's not a health hub with other partners coming into and begging for space, but actually it's more of a fair and balanced partnership approach to doing something. So that's literally been mentioned to me last week. It sounds really interesting because of what's happening locally. That's one idea just to throw out there.
Is there anything potentially, maybe from a prototype point of view, to wave the flag in what's going on in the world of like the Future Generation Commissioner world? I know Compass is a affiliate member of the network, and I didn't know what links maybe Cardiff Council have got with them. I mean, it would be niche, but I think there's an opportunity to wave the flag and go, look, over in Wales, this is what we're up to. And
I have to say, I haven't considered it from that perspective, purely because I suppose to us, the well-being of future generations act is all encompassing, really, you know. So to think about it in a policy prototype way, you know, we did try and do this at one point, because at one point there was an English council relatively near to us that I don't think is no longer a member anyway. But certainly within Wales, although Llanelli Town Council, sorry, Llanelli, my Welsh pronunciation is not brilliant being Scottish. They are a member, an associate member. Compass is an affiliate member, but Cardiff is the only local authority who's a member, and so we have sort of lacked the opportunity to work with partners who are grappling with the same legislative requirements as us within Wales, and we do miss that. So sorry, that's just a little thing. If we can get any more Welsh local authorities in, I'd really appreciate it.
We had some good conversations over the weekend with colleagues from Newport Council, but yeah.
Oh, brilliant! We had the CCIN conference in Cardiff in 2016, and Newport did come along at that point. 10 years on, come on, let's get them in. Yeah, sorry, to get back to your more serious question. It might be that policy prototypes would be a good thing to do. Certainly, we are, although we're tackling the same wicked problems that everybody else is: climate emergency, housing emergency, children with additional learning needs, things like that. But yeah, maybe there is something we could do ourselves that would perhaps be relevant to other English and Scottish local authorities as well. Maybe to give that a bit of consideration. I will say within Cardiff, since I've been involved in CCIN, we've not led a property policy lab, sorry. We have been involved in them though. My biggest reflection is that everyone's very different. There's no one size fits all. I think what Morgan was saying earlier, each of them are tailored to the individuals, to the problem, but they are each quite unique. So one of the arts and culture for social cohesion that we had to cover on the screen earlier, I was very involved in that one, and I was very proud to do so, you know, and that was a very interesting one because it got me connected to different local authorities again through the officer network. And in fact, through the conference, I was literally doorstepped by somebody from Stevenage in the count about that one and said, "Hi, do you want to do this?" And I went, "Oh." But that was a really rewarding one, and that was the one I've personally been most involved with, so I'm very proud of the video that we were able to create at the end of that. And Cardiff is currently involved in the treat and care experience as a characteristic with Swindon, which I'm not directly involved in, but I'm really interested in seeing the outcomes of that. And the fact that I'm not directly involved is other officers in the Cardiff Council, I think is really, really promising. And I was able to get other officers from Cardiff to the workshop yesterday as well, just to spread that word a bit more. So sorry, very roundabout answer to a fairly simple question, but I hope all of that was useful in some way.
We're starting to do this work with our principal authority is Staffordshire Moorlands District Council, and they're not a member, but they've just for the first time released this community asset transfer policy. There hasn't been any consultation as such on that, and so we're very early on at this stage where we're kind of going, okay, so what do we want? Do we want anything? What's involved in this? As a town or parish, actually, you need to kind of have a bit of a crystal ball, because how much of the information that you want is there for you to kind of help yourself to with regards to how it runs, how much it costs, all that sort of stuff. It's just very early on in our thought process. But I thought because we are so early on, it might be quite nice to kind of plot this work and work it through as part of kind of potential learning for others. That's where I was at, really.
You know, there is some resources out there already with regards to asset transfers on the case studies and the policy projects online. But also you've tapped into a real vein around LGR. So Councillor Robbins, Chair of the Network, was talking with the District Councils Network last week, and they've invited him to come along and talk about the role of the CCIN at the District Councils Network. Now, why that's really important is because we think we've got an opportunity to provide some resources to local authorities who are going through LGR, who might be turning into kind of that unitary element, who just haven't had resources and powers before. So it might just, there are community asset information out there already, but I think you might have tapped on something a bit wider as part of how do we support members who are transitioning through LGR and the wider responsibilities that are happening. I know, Morgan, you're doing some work over in your local authority on how you can empower.
So at the moment, we're going through devolution as a big thing. So actually, a combined authority coming in alongside us. And so as part of that, we are looking at the way that double devolution happens as well. So as well as power coming from Whitehall, power and funding from Whitehall to Cheshire and Mornington, how we as a council be better about power and funding coming from the council down to distinct communities, and defining what those communities are. Because is it town and parish council level? Do we want to use the same geographies that the NHS use for certain patches? So yes, so there's work going on there to work out the framework for how we do it, as well as the process, and how much we want to do some overarching principles of how we will do this, but then work differently with each community so that it reflects what they need rather than a top-down, bottom-down approach. So that work is happening. It's beautifully complicated, really interesting, but yeah, there's a lot to do there.
Thanks for that, Sarah Morgan. But yeah, something around that. And I think the really important thing here is the next step from this will be to put some ideas onto the spreadsheet that we're going to share in the chat channel.
What we do in terms of the values and principle board is that the members become sponsors of projects as well. So you're not totally on your own. So some of the sort of apprehensions that people have, like, we are there to support you to ensure that, the reason why your project was selected was because we see the merits of it. So we do want it to be a success. So we usually have a board member will be a sponsor. So they're there in the sort of, say, in the background, to sort of ensure that everything is going okay. And then if you come across any issues or anything, they're there to sort of support you. Thanks.
There's like not a job spec, but there's a bit of a specification as to what it involves when you're a project sponsor from the VMP, and I think that really is useful from both sides. Okay, Millie, just can we go to you for a final wrap up, just as a rabble rousing? Yeah, is there an opportunity?
Well, I know. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who attended today, or if you're watching this later. But if you have any ideas or thoughts and you're unsure, then please get in touch with us. But this is the point of it. Like, this is, as part of being a member, this is part of your membership. So the idea is that we want to see enough projects that help us in terms of sort of like as a local authority of like how we can work better, and making sure that the sort of social partnership and co-production comes into sort of into light. So I would really like it if you got any ideas, come and speak to myself, come and speak to Morgan, drop us a line, have a look at our case study packs, because that should really get sort of maybe some ideas going. And then also sometimes if you see a case study pack and if you want to build on, there's also sort of opportunity to sort of see like, where that is, and then maybe that needs further developing. And the application timeline is sort of as opened now. So please speak to us in the next few weeks if you're thinking about applying, but you're unsure, because any challenges, we can help you through those.
Thanks, Millie. Toby posted in the chat. Thank you from me. Just here to start learning the ropes from others, but it's been useful. So I suppose, Morgan, we've all got to start somewhere, haven't we? There was a first policy project which you first got involved in all those years ago or whatever it was, but just what is the last tip and trick you want to give to the group, Morgan?
Say just start sharing ideas, because a silly idea can turn into a great one which get into conversation with people. So it doesn't need to be the end point you put up in that spreadsheet now. Start a conversation, see where it ends up. And it is a really good way of becoming a stronger part of the network, getting involved in the policy lab. You get to know people, you get to work with people. It really works.